Space. An endless sea of darkness, desolation, and oftentimes, destruction. Because in that void lies the constant dread of a hostile creature lurking. An alien. The things we hope to discover could lead us to our very demise. Space travel can really suck. And this was the case for two cool dudes from the planet Funkotron. Yes, it's ToeJam and Earl, two hip young buddies from the land of funk. But before we can start with the story of this funky duo's adventure, we must learn of how they came to be. Because while the names may not sound too strange now, there was a time when their existence was quite alien. The characters and scenario for ToeJam and Earl were conceptualized by series creator Greg Johnson back in the late 1980s. Johnson had previously worked as a game designer for Electronic Arts on the games Starflight and Caveman Ugg Olympics. His idea was to combine lighthearted sci-fi elements with hip-hop culture and gameplay inspired by the PC title Rogue. He teamed up with programmer Mark Vorsanger, and the two launched Johnson Vorsanger Productions and vowed to create his vision. Having already been involved in the video game industry, the two got to pitch their idea to Sega, who at the time were looking for inventive games with larger-than-life characters to compete with Nintendo's mascot, Mario. It was a no-brainer for Sega to greenlight this, as the Genesis was just getting started, so the duo began their work on ToeJam and Whirl. Wait a second, the names of our heroes were in fact a mistake. Vorsanger misheard the original names ToeJam and Whirl as ToeJam and Earl. Sega liked the name so much that it stuck. Launching in 1991 and backed with some of the greatest commercials of the decade, the game follows two friends obviously named ToeJam and Earl. As they are traveling through space, ToeJam reluctantly gives Earl a wheel and then immediately regrets it. The partners crash land on a planet called Earth. You might call them aliens, but I'd bet they say the same about you. And that is one of my biggest takeaways from the game. Often in media, Earthlings in space are portrayed as the innocent ones, the ones being harmed by the evil alien outsiders. However, in TJ&E, it's the humans that are violent, evil, and generally annoying. The pair must attempt to gather the pieces of their smashed rocket ship and leave the hellscape planet we call Earth. You control ToeJam or Earl, or preferably both if you can find a buddy, and move them across a top-down view as you hunt for the ship pieces using your map. Some levels may have a piece and some may not, but after you've concluded your search of a level, you must locate the exit elevator to reach the next. And these levels are quite literal. Your character can physically fall from your current level to a previous one, forcing you to make your way back to the exit elevator you just found. All this won't be easy because Earth is full of insane people trying to hurt you or impede your progress. Packs of nerds trying to stampede you, insane mailboxes ready to tear your head off, giant hamsters rolling around to flatten you. The enemies are completely absurd, and I don't think I've ever seen any of those on Earth. Well, I guess maybe the pack of nerds. What helps you along your expedition are present boxes. The contents are a mystery until you open them, and then every subsequent box that's decorated the same will have the same item inside. What adds to the game's zaniness is that there are presents that can help you out a ton, some are kinda meh, and others will actually screw you over. My personal faves are the Icarus wings to fly, super high tops to increase your speed, or the tomatoes you can throw to attack at enemies. And there are some real brutal ones that might straight up kill you, like being hit with a lightning bolt or getting caught in a tomato rain. Using packages will earn you points to level up your character from a wiener all the way up to a funk lord. These promotions will give your character increased health. The game is much slower paced than other action games of the era, but to me that's what adds to the enjoyment. You can take your time and simply explore. The gameplay is incredibly easy to get the hang of, and of course bringing a friend along for the ride is the true way to play. Because at the core of this game, it's about two good buds joking around, having a good time. And that's what you get when you play with a friend. What was incredibly unique, even for today, was that each level's layout was randomly generated, as was the placement of the items, spaceship pieces, and elevators. This meant different playthroughs felt fresh. It gives the game a ton of replayability, and I can't count how many times I played it over the course of my life. I still have a blast with it, and the co-op is what makes it so damn fun. While not too shabby, the graphics definitely look like an early Genesis game. Where it shines though is the character and enemy design. Lots of really goofy looking Earthlings, and though the sprites are on the smaller side, ToeJam and Earl are expressive and dynamic. They had big personalities that jumped right off the screen. ToeJam tries to play it cool, even if he isn't, while Earl is a big goof. Just look at him blush when his pants randomly fall down. Their chemistry was the heart and soul of this game. And I'd give the duo 9 Chris Tuckers out of 10 Jackie Chans on the Chan-Tucker scale of friendship. Something about the original that I never cared for was the overall environment. Yes, it technically took place on Earth, but each level looked identical, with these floating green islands on a starry space background. It doesn't feel like a planet, but this shortcoming in no way hinders the actual game. You still have this amazing co-op quest with the funkiest soundtrack this side of the Milky Way galaxy. Each song is a groove that sticks with you like gum on your shoe. Also, I love the idea that these space aliens are into funk. Don't ask me why, but I find it surreal. While the game was surely a gamble on behalf of Sega, it turned out to be a sleeper hit. While sales were initially slow, TJ&E gained a cult following leading to sales of over 350,000 units. That may not seem like a ton these days, but think back to when the game was released, and how this genre wasn't very well represented, given that platformers were all the rage. So Sega called for more ToeJam and Earl, and Johnson and Vorsanger were ready to deliver, and they did in a huge way. The sequel, ToeJam and Earl Panic on Funkotron, hit the store shelves in 1993, and it was bigger and better in just about every way. A more in-depth story, incredible graphics, and the soundtrack had more funky tunes that we fans craved. But remember how I just said platformers were the cat's pajamas in the 90s? Well, this was the biggest difference of all. Instead of that top-down treasure hunt, we got a side-scrolling platformer. Sega wanted to go with a mass appeal approach. And based on interviews with Johnson and Vorsanger, while they weren't expressly told to make a platformer, the Sega bigwigs weren't very receptive to them building off the concepts and the gameplay of the original. So Panic on Funkotron was made with mainstream audiences and Sega's approval in mind. While the gameplay is drastically different, the story is a continuation of the first game. As our heroes left Earth, hundreds of icky humans hitched a ride on their ship and are now loose wreaking havoc on Funkotron. And everyone is blaming ToeJam and Earl. So the boys are back to collect the humans and ship them off home. To do so, they are equipped with an endless amount of jars to throw at these filthy Earthlings. Each style of human takes a certain amount of hits to capture, and when they are jarred, you must pick it up and stash them away. Once you've captured all the humans on a particular level, you pack them up and send them on their way to Earth. Then it's on to the next level. There are a few limited abilities that can help you on your journey, like a funk scan to see where the Earthlings are hiding or find secret doors, the ability to funk through walls, a panic button that flings jars in every direction, or a funk vac that inhales all the enemies on the screen and jars them immediately. Humans can be hiding in trees, bushes, manholes, and you shake these to reveal what's hiding. Sometimes there could be a present, only this time they don't give you the wide array of items, just coins, points, or funk. So shaking a tree could be very random. I always loved how the humans would jump out and yell surprise, and nearly give me a heart attack at age 8. There are also a few fun minigames that can give you bonuses. You can jam out with an alien comrade, impress the judges with your fungus bouncing, or enter the Hyperfunk Zone to nab extra goodies. While the randomly generated levels and promotions are gone, the scavenger hunt aspect is still here, because you must try and collect 10 different objects, with the reason behind the collectathon being as wacky as everything else in the game. These 10 objects are the favorite items of the Great Funkopotamus, and you need them to persuade him to leave the funk dimension, where he is hidden since he is afraid of Earthlings. He is the source for all funk on the planet, so you better get your butt in gear and find his favorite things, or funk as we know it will cease to exist. The collecting isn't necessary to beat the game, but I always feel the need to, since you must interact with the inhabitants of Funkotron to learn the location of the hidden items. And all the dialogue and characters are just a laugh riot. I love constantly ringing on the doorbells on houses to get a rise out of the people living there, or chatting with Smoot, a narcissist who is always checking himself out in the mirror, or Otis, the wise elder, who'll give you tips, but you have to sit through a long-winded speech first. Each one of the characters are entertaining, and the story is light years ahead of the original. The visuals of Panic on Funkotron are also a complete upgrade from the first. It's better in every conceivable way. The character sprites are way bigger, with a variety of extremely fluid animations, highly detailed backgrounds that give Funkotron plenty of diversity in locales, incredibly hilarious enemy designs like the duck on a flying carpet, insane poodles, or the ghost cow. And each of these can damage you in different ways, making it fun to see your character get hit, which sounds a little counterintuitive, but I love it. This is by far one of the best looking games on the Sega Genesis. I mentioned how much I adore the first game's soundtrack, but 2 blows it out of the water. The songs from the first make a comeback, but now with way more intricacies and layers. And there are plenty of new jams too that are equally as phenomenal. I've heard the soundtrack thousands of times in my life, and I will never get sick of it. John Baker, the original composer, returned and laid down the hammer to create the funkiest video game soundtrack of all time. Though Johnson and Vorsanger's original plans were scrapped, the game was seen as a success both commercially and critically. Although there were fans of the original gameplay who felt left out in the cold, and even some were angry, as if they sold out their original formula. Nevertheless, I still freaking love this game. Mainly because you can explore the planet Funkotron. It's colorful, strange, and feels very alive. It's jam-packed with unique characters who are all well fleshed out. The entire presentation left such an impression on me, it's one of my top 10 favorite video games. So both games were a success, and both had their own merit. So a third game was a lock, right? Well, in the mid-90s, things weren't exactly going Sega's way. With the botched launch of the Sega Saturn, it was selling poorly in the United States. So this led to no third ToeJam Earl game for the floundering system. In 1995, Johnson and Vorsanger gained the rights to ToeJam Earl, and began work to find a new home for the duo's next adventure. It took them years to start working on the game. After bouncing around from console to console, they finally landed back in bed with Sega, with hopes to launch it on the Dreamcast. But again, Sega was struggling with another console, and eventually stopped support altogether of the Dreamcast in 2001, just 2 years after it launched. Though the Dreamcast was discontinued, part of the game was finished. So the developers worked on porting it to a new system. And just as it started years ago on the Genesis, ToeJam and Earl were bound for another fledgling console beginning to make its way: the Xbox. The newest game was called ToeJam and Earl 3: Mission to Earth, and it seems that this was the follow-up to the original that Johnson and Vorsanger strived for. It returned to the game's roots of a scavenger hunt on Earth, and it even used the initial story concept for the second game. The funky aliens were now in search of the Great Funkopotamus's record collection, the 12 sacred albums of funk. The story was simple, but 10 years had passed since the second game, and times were changing. Games were expected to have a heavier focus on story, sharp graphics, and cutscenes. So for the first time ever, we got to hear our alien heroes talk. And I'm sure I'll get flack for this, but I actually enjoy the voice work for ToeJam and Earl 3. ToeJam still had his too cool for school persona, even though he was kind of actually a dweeb. And Earl was as goofy as ever with a deep, booming voice. I think it fit well. The chemistry between the two was still just as solid, but an unfamiliar character was about to enter the fold. Her name was Letitia, and she was here to make it a trio. A lot of people didn't like this addition, but I don't mind her inclusion, and her interactions with the love-struck ToeJam are quite amusing. But the game is still only 2 players, so most people are either going to choose ToeJam or Earl. Sorry, Letitia. The gameplay closely followed the original as well. It's almost as though this was a 3D remake, with little differences in the actual gameplay concepts. Plenty of things make a return, like the promotion system, presents containing items, and even some returning humans like the Carrot Man and the Mad Dentist. Your crew searches levels to find not only the records, but also keys to unlock levels, new power-ups, and now instead of destroying humans, you must convert them to the ways of the funk. Once you complete all the tasks in a level, you must find the exit elevator. To incentivize choosing a character over another, they played a little bit differently. ToeJam and his third leg make him insanely fast compared to the other two. Earl and his curves give him some extra brute force, and he'll eat just about anything. And Letitia is the all-around player in terms of jump height, speed, and strength. Possibly the best part about the game is the super stylish character select screen. Sounds crazy, but each character gives you a sick rap about themselves. It oozes attitude. While there are so many similarities to the original, the controls of the game aren't nearly as tight as in previous. And the camera is what puts a damper on a fairly enjoyable experience. You can rotate the camera around you, but it always stays behind you. You can't angle it up or down, which can make it difficult to see something that's directly ahead of you. And once you get both characters on screen, you both have control over the same camera. It makes splitting up the more favorable scenario. And while I do feel some of the spirit is still left in the game, unlike the first two games, 3 gets repetitive pretty quickly, even though the playtime is around 4 to 6 hours. Graphically, it's taken quite the hit. Maybe I just prefer the sprite work over 3D models, but there's a distinct lack of personality in the game's world. Gone are the lush backgrounds, and instead there's a lot of fog to cover up endless nothingness. The character designs themselves are okay. I like Earl a lot, though ToeJam looks a bit creepier than I remembered. But at least he's finally had the decency to put on some clothes. The humans don't have the same charm they once had, and you rarely get to see them as up close and personal as you did in previous games. You can add the music in that part as well, because it is definitely taking a backseat to the dialogue in the mix. Previously, the funk was always front and center, but in 3 the music is very low in volume compared to the character voices. And after I listened to 3's soundtrack alone, it is awesome as it has ever been, but the characters are often spouting random phrases, and while funny, I think I would have preferred the funky bass to be the focal point. And side note, every time you complete a task, there are gospel singers that will sing congratulations to you. It is so obnoxious, because you can complete a lot of tasks very quickly, and their voices will drive you mad. ToeJam Earl 3 is easily the weakest entry in the series, but by no means unplayable. An average game with hints of greatness sprinkled in. People are often surprised that a third game even existed. And as a fan of these 2 alien homies, I still like playing 3. And I'll always recommend playing the complete trilogy as a whole to truly experience the funkiest games in the universe. But after what many considered a lackluster return with poor sales figures, the franchise again went dormant. Years passed and we saw neither hide nor hair of our beloved aliens. I wondered if we'd ever see one of my favorite franchises return. That was until 2015. With the rise of indie developers taking to the likes of Kickstarter, original creator Greg Johnson announced that a new ToeJam Earl game would enter the crowdfunding arena. It soundly met its $400,000 goal and also gained financial backing from Adult Swim Games. After years in development and a few delays, a new game has been released, and this time for all systems. It's finally time for ToeJam Earl to get back in the groove. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked that video, click the link to learn about Mario's mustache. And if you like It's All Fun and Games, then make sure to subscribe. Thanks again.